I never thought a closed door could change a man's life, until it closed on Darius Cole. He stood outside that garage with cash in his hand, money he earned, not borrowed. And they saw him through the glass, and did nothing. No sorry, just silence, like he didn't exist. 25 years later, that same man walked into Darius Cole's garage, asking for help. Funny how things turn. Have you ever been ignored by someone who thought you didn't matter? The summer sun pressed down on Houston like molten glass, turning steel into mirrors and air into something thick enough to taste. Inside the garage, and the world shifted. Sound softened. Even footsteps seemed to bow in quiet reverence as they echoed across polished concrete floors. Rows of supercars, sleek, low, impossibly expensive, rested beneath precise lighting, their curves catching reflections like sleeping beasts that knew their own worth. Ethan Caldwell stood at the entrance, unmoving, mid-40s, pale-skinned, always sharply dressed, a senior asset appraiser known for his skepticism. He had built a career on numbers, not myths. He trusted paperwork, leverage, debt structures, things that could be traced, verified, explained. But this made no sense. No loans? He asked again, almost to himself, flipping through the documents as if they might rearrange into something more reasonable. No outside investors, no equity dilution, no liens. The assistant beside him nodded quickly, uncertain. Ethan exhaled slowly. His eyes drifted across the vast space again, searching for cracks in the illusion. There had to be one. Wealth like this didn't just appear. Then he saw him. Darius Cole stood near the far end of the garage, half-shadowed beneath a suspended light. Early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence carried a quiet gravity rather than force. His skin bore the marks of years spent working with metal and heat, hands rough, movements precise. He wore no watch, no visible symbols of excess, only a dark work shirt, sleeves rolled, and an expression that suggested he had long stopped needing to prove anything. But it wasn't his appearance that held Ethan's attention. It was his stillness. Darius wasn't looking at the cars. He was looking at something else. A car, older than the rest, tucked away in the corner. Dust clung to its surface like memory refusing to fade. It didn't belong among the polished perfection. It disrupted the symmetry, like a scar that had been deliberately left visible. Ethan stepped closer, curiosity tightening around him. "You built all of this?" Darius didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the old car, as if listening to something only he could hear. Finally, he nodded once. Ethan let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "That's not how this works." Darius's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. "It is," he said calmly. Something in the simplicity of that answer unsettled Ethan more than any explanation could have. Because it didn't try to convince him. It didn't need to. Ethan walked deeper into the garage, his polished shoes suddenly feeling too loud in a place built on silence. He ran a hand along the hood of a nearby car, then another. Each machine told the same story: precision, discipline, time. No shortcuts, no visible cracks. His mind searched for the missing piece. There had to be one. "What changed?" Ethan asked, turning back. "People don't just arrive here." Darius's gaze finally shifted, meeting his. There was no arrogance in it, no triumph, only something older. "A door didn't open," he said. Ethan frowned slightly. "What?" Darius didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned and walked toward the corner of the garage, toward the dust-covered car. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, like someone retracing a path they had walked many times before, even if only in memory. Ethan followed, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to change. The polished perfection of the garage faded into the background, replaced by something quieter, heavier. Darius reached the car and rested a hand lightly on its surface. The dust shifted beneath his fingers, revealing a faint line of original paint. For a moment he said nothing. But his eyes weren't in Houston anymore. They were somewhere else. Somewhere hotter, harsher. Somewhere with glass between him and something he needed. Ethan felt it then, that strange, almost imperceptible shift, the kind that doesn't announce itself but rewrites everything that follows. "Who did this belong to?" he asked softly. Darius's hand stilled, then quietly, "Me." Ethan blinked. Before this? A pause, long enough to feel like the edge of something deeper. Darius's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in memory. "Before anything," he said. Silence settled between them, heavier now. Ethan looked at the car again, really looked this time. It wasn't just old. It had been repaired, carefully, repeatedly. It carried the marks of someone who refused to let it die, just like everything else in this place. Ethan straightened slowly, something unfamiliar pressing against his usual certainty. "How did you start?" he asked. Darius didn't answer right away. Instead, his thumb brushed a small, worn spot on the car's edge, like touching a scar that no longer hurt, but was never forgotten. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Someone saw me," he said. Ethan waited. Darius's gaze lifted slightly, but not to Ethan, to something far beyond him, and chose not to open the door. The words didn't echo, but they stayed. And in that moment, standing in a garage worth millions, surrounded by proof of what had been built, Ethan realized something unsettling. This place didn't begin with opportunity. It began with silence. The heat in Atlanta clung to the skin like a second layer, heavy and unmoving, as if even the air had given up on mercy. Darius Cole stood across the street from the garage, his fingers still wrapped around a few folded bills, thin, creased, earned through long hours and longer silences. At 21, he was lean and sharp-eyed, his clothes marked by oil and effort, his presence quiet but unyielding. He had walked miles to get here, not out of desperation, but discipline. Every dollar mattered more than comfort. Across the glass wall, the world looked different. Clean uniforms, bright lights, movements that carried ease instead of strain. Laughter drifted faintly, like something not meant for him. One man inside, Calvin Rhodes, late 30s, neatly groomed, confident in the way of someone who had rarely been denied, glanced toward Darius briefly, then turned away without pause. It wasn't cruelty. That was what made it worse. Darius stepped closer to the door anyway, not because he expected it to open, but because part of him needed to know for certain. His reflection met him in the glass, smudged, tired, real. Inside, a small bell hung above the door, still, silent, waiting for someone else. No one came. No one moved. The moment stretched, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to leave a mark. Behind the building, a stray dog rested in the thin strip of shade beside a rusted dumpster, small, brown, ribs faintly visible beneath its fur, one ear torn as if shaped by survival rather than care. Its eyes lifted briefly toward Darius, tired, observant, familiar with disappointment, before lowering again, conserving energy, conserving expectation. Darius noticed it, and in that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not sympathy, recognition. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger needed sound, needed friction. This moment had none. Only silence sharp enough to reshape something inside him. He stepped back from the door. The bills in his hand suddenly felt heavier, not because of their weight, but because of what they could not buy. His thoughts began to shift, not around the rejection itself, but around its meaning. If a door could decide you didn't belong before you even touched it, then waiting wasn't patience. It was surrender. Inside, Calvin laughed again, louder this time, the sound cutting through the stillness like a misplaced echo. It didn't reach Darius. Not really. By then, he had already turned away. Each step he took felt deliberate, not rushed, not defeated. Final. People often imagine life-changing moments as loud, explosive things, arguments, slammed doors, words that leave scars. But this one had none of that, just heat, glass, silence, and a decision. By the time Darius reached the end of the street, the plan hadn't fully formed, but something deeper had, a direction, a refusal, a quiet rebellion against dependence. He would learn everything, not just how to fix machines, but how to build a life that didn't require permission to begin. The money in his hand would not buy the part he came for, but it would buy time. And time, if used well, could become something far more powerful than opportunity. It could become freedom. Behind him, the garage door finally opened, for someone else. The bell rang, clear and bright, as if the world had simply been waiting for the right person. Darius didn't turn back. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. Not because he had been let in, but because he no longer needed to be. The wind slipped through broken metal sheets, carrying dust and the faint scent of old oil, as if the building itself remembered every failure it had witnessed. Darius Cole stood in the doorway of the abandoned workshop, keys cold in his palm, staring into a space most people would have walked away from without a second thought. The roof sagged slightly on one side, the concrete floor stained with years of neglect, and the silence inside was not peaceful. It was hollow. But to Darius, it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space no one else had claimed. Space that did not need permission. He stepped inside. The first night, he didn't fix anything. He just sat on an overturned crate, listening to the wind, to the creak of metal, to the distant hum of the city that had already decided he didn't belong. His hands rested on his knees, still carrying the memory of that unopened door. But something had shifted. The silence here was different. It didn't reject him. It waited. By the second day, he found his first job. Not through advertisement, not through reputation, but through chance, or something that looked like it. A woman named Rosa Martinez, early 40s, practical, sharp-eyed, a single mother who had learned to survive by trusting her instincts more than people, arrived with a battered sedan that coughed more than it ran. She didn't ask for credentials. She didn't ask for proof. She just looked at Darius, then at the workshop, then back at him. "You fix it," she said simply. Darius nodded. No promises, just action. The engine was worse than it looked. Cracked seals, worn belts, a sound deep inside that suggested something closer to failure than repair. Most would have turned her away. But Darius didn't see a broken car. He saw a pattern waiting to be understood. He leaned in, closed his eyes for a moment, and listened. Not just to the noise, but to the rhythm beneath it. Hours passed, then more. Sweat mixed with grease. Hands moving slowly at first, then with growing certainty. Piece by piece he worked, not forcing the machine, but understanding it, adjusting, respecting, learning its language. By nightfall, the engine turned over once, then again, and then steady, alive. Rosa didn't smile right away. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a folded bill, and placed it on the workbench. "I'll be back," she said. She was, and she wasn't alone. Word spread the way truth often does, quietly, carried by those who had nothing to gain from lying. One car became two became five. Not luxury, not yet. Just vehicles that others had given up on, cars that mirrored the people who brought them. Tired, overlooked, underestimated. Darius worked through all of them. Day blurred into night, night into morning. He slept little, ate when he remembered, lived entirely within the rhythm of engines and effort. There were failures, engines that refused to cooperate, parts that didn't fit, moments when frustration pressed hard against his chest. But he never stopped. Because stopping would mean returning to a world where doors decided his worth, and he had already left that world behind. The stray dog from the alley appeared again one evening, thinner than before, but still watching with the same quiet awareness. Darius tossed it a piece of bread without thinking. The dog didn't approach immediately. It waited. Then slowly, cautiously, it stepped forward, took the food, and retreated. Not out of fear, but habit. Day by day, it came closer. Until one night, it stayed. Darius didn't name it. He didn't need to. Some things didn't require ownership to belong. Weeks turned into months. The workshop changed, not in structure, but in presence. The air felt different, less hollow, more used. Tools found their place. Surfaces were cleaned, not for appearance, but for function. The space began to breathe again, and so did Darius. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the broken roof in gold, a man pulled up in a car far newer than anything Darius had touched so far. Leon Brooks, mid-30s, a delivery driver with a reputation for pushing machines beyond their limits, stepped out with a skeptical look. He had heard the rumors. He didn't believe them. Not yet. "You're the one fixing the dead engines?" Leon asked. Darius wiped his hands slowly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I fix what listens," he replied. Leon frowned slightly, unsure what that meant. But he handed over the keys anyway. Because something about the place felt different. Not impressive. Not polished. Real. As the engine cooled, ticking softly in the fading light, Darius rested his hand on the hood, feeling the heat beneath his palm. For the first time, the path ahead didn't feel uncertain. It felt earned. And somewhere in the quiet hum of machines that refused to stay broken, something greater was taking shape. Not just a business, not just survival, but a foundation built on something no closed door could ever take away. He hadn't been given a place, so he built one that didn't need permission to exist. The late afternoon light stretched long across the polished floor, turning chrome into gold and shadows into quiet witnesses. Years had reshaped everything. The once abandoned workshop now stood as a fully realized garage, structured, alive, precise. The air no longer carried emptiness, but intention. Every tool placed where it belonged, every movement measured. Engines no longer arrived here to be abandoned. They came to be trusted again. Darius Cole moved through the space without hurry, his presence calm but undeniable. Now in his early 40s, broader, steadier, his hands still marked by labor, but his eyes had changed. They no longer searched for validation. They observed, decided, moved on. Near the entrance, the old stray dog still lingered. Older now, its fur more faded than brown, its movement slower, but its gaze just as steady. It had stayed all these years, not owned, not named, but never leaving. Like the place itself, it had survived long enough to belong. That was when the door opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the air. A man stepped inside. Calvin Rhodes, older now, early 50s, the sharp edges of confidence softened by time, his once perfect posture carrying a slight hesitation. His suit was expensive, but not enough to hide the subtle weight of someone who had learned, too late, that control does not last forever. Years ago, a failed investment and a partnership collapse had stripped away much of what he believed defined him. What remained was quieter, less certain. He paused just inside the entrance, eyes adjusting, not to the light, but to the realization of where he stood. Darius noticed him immediately, not because of recognition alone, but because of the shift in presence. Some people carried noise, others carried history. Calvin carried both. For a moment, neither man spoke, not out of tension, but out of understanding. Calvin stepped forward, slower than before, holding a set of keys that didn't belong to him the way confidence once had. "I need help," he said. No explanation, no introduction, just truth. Darius nodded once. "Leave it there." No hesitation, no acknowledgement of the past, just work. The car, a high-end model, sleek but silent in the wrong way, sat in the center bay. Its engine had failed in a way that suggested more than wear. Neglect, misjudgment. Perhaps both. Darius moved around it, eyes scanning, hands already understanding before touching. Calvin watched. At first, like a man waiting for judgment. Then, slowly, like a man witnessing something he no longer controlled. "You knew," Calvin said after a while, voice quieter than it used to be. Darius didn't look up. "Knew what?" "That day," Calvin swallowed lightly. "You remember," Darius's hands paused for a fraction of a second, then continued. "I remember everything," he said. Not bitter, not sharp, just factual. Silence followed, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one didn't exclude, it allowed. Calvin shifted his weight, the polished floor reflecting a version of himself he no longer fully recognized. "I didn't think it mattered," he admitted. Darius tightened a bolt, the metallic click echoing softly. "It didn't," he said. Calvin blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. Darius finally looked up, not at Calvin's past, not at his regret, but at who he was now. "It mattered to me," Darius added calmly, "but not the way you think." Calvin said nothing, because for the first time, he understood. The door he never opened hadn't stopped anything. It had started something. Hours passed. The work continued with quiet precision. No shortcuts, no performance, just skill, built over years that no one had witnessed but Darius himself. When the engine finally turned over, smooth, controlled, alive, Calvin exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Darius stepped back, wiping his hands. "It's done." Calvin reached into his jacket, pulling out payment. More than necessary, more than fair. Darius took only what was owed, no more. Calvin hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." Darius gave a small nod in return. No forgiveness spoken, no apology required, because neither of them needed it anymore. As Calvin walked toward the exit, the dog near the door lifted its head briefly, watching him with the same quiet awareness it had once given Darius. Then it rested again. The door opened, closed, and just like that, the past left the room, not erased, just without power. The morning air carried a quieter warmth now, softened by years of work that had turned struggle into something steady, something lived in. Darius Cole stood at the edge of the garage floor, watching, not the cars this time, but the people moving between them. The space had grown again, not just in size, but in purpose. Where engines once filled the silence, now voices did, measured, focused, alive. A young man struggled near one of the lifts, his hands hesitant over a disassembled engine. Jamal Carter, 19, thin, sharp-eyed, but guarded, had grown up moving between foster homes, learning early that stability was something other people talked about, not something you expected. Mistakes had followed him, not because he lacked intelligence, but because no one had ever stayed long enough to teach him what to do with it. "Stop forcing it," Darius said calmly, stepping closer. Jamal stiffened slightly, expecting correction the way he had learned to expect most things, with judgment attached. "I'm trying," Jamal muttered. "I know," Darius replied, crouching beside him. "That's the problem," Jamal frowned. Darius reached forward, placing his hand lightly on the engine. "Listen first," he said. Jamal hesitated, then leaned in. The noise was subtle, uneven, almost easy to ignore. But not here. Not anymore. Across the room, Lena Brooks, late 20s, Leon's younger sister, worked quietly at a workstation, her movements precise. She had once studied engineering before dropping out to support her family after their mother fell ill, a responsibility that had shaped her into someone who trusted discipline over dreams. Now, she was rebuilding both, piece by piece. This place had become something else entirely. Not just a garage, a system, a rhythm. People arrived here with more than broken machines. They brought doubt, hesitation, stories unfinished. And Darius, he didn't erase those things. He redirected them. The old stray dog lay near the entrance, slower now, its breathing heavier with age, but still present. It watched the room the same way it always had, not searching, not needing, just witnessing. Jamal adjusted his grip, more carefully this time. The engine responded, slightly, but enough. "There," Darius said. "You don't fight it, you understand it." Jamal didn't answer, but something in his posture shifted. Less resistance, more attention. That was how it always began, not with confidence, with awareness. Weeks turned into months. Jamal stayed, then improved, then helped someone else. Lena began designing small modifications, improving efficiency in ways Darius hadn't needed, but recognized immediately. Leon still came by, less as a customer now, more as someone who understood the weight of what had been built here. And the garage kept expanding, not just in space, but in reach. Darius didn't advertise. He didn't need to. The right people found their way here the same way he once had, through necessity, through quiet recommendation, through the kind of trust that couldn't be manufactured. One evening as the sun lowered and shadows stretched long across the floor, Ethan Caldwell returned, He stood at the entrance again, but this time he didn't look confused. He looked aware. "You built more than a business," Ethan said, stepping inside. Darius didn't turn immediately. He was watching Jamal explain something to another newcomer, a kid younger than him, nervous, uncertain, but listening. "I built a place," Darius said simply. Ethan nodded slowly, taking in the room, not just the machines, but the movement, the intention behind every action. "No debt," Ethan said quietly. "No investors." Darius shook his head once. Ethan let out a breath, almost a laugh, but softer this time. "That's not supposed to work." Darius's gaze shifted, just slightly. "It does," he said, not as an argument, as a fact. Near the entrance, the old dog stirred, lifting its head one last time, as if acknowledging something only it could understand. Its eyes moved across the room, Darius, Jamal, Lena, then slowly closed again, not in weakness, but in completion. Nothing here had been given. Everything here had been built. And as the evening settled into quiet, the garage remained open, not just in structure, but in purpose. Because the door Darius once stood before was no longer relevant. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't broken it. He had simply built something larger, something that didn't ask who you were before letting you in. And in doing so, he made sure no one else would have to wait outside again. At the end of this story, when the engines fall silent and the light settles softly across the floor, something deeper begins to speak. Something beyond effort, beyond skill, beyond what the eye can measure. Because what happened here was not just hard work. It was guidance, quiet, patient, unseen. Darius stood before a door that never opened. But maybe that door was never meant for him. Because sometimes God's miracle is not opening the door you're knocking on, but leading you to build the one you were meant to walk through. God doesn't always answer with yes. Sometimes he answers with silence, so you can discover the strength he already placed inside you. And in your own life, you may have felt that same silence, a rejection, a missed chance, a moment where everything seemed to stop and you wondered, why me? But what if that wasn't the end? What if it was God whispering, I am preparing something greater for you? If this story touched you, share it with someone who might be standing in front of a closed door right now. You never know whose life you might change with a single story. Leave a comment. I will build my own door if you believe your journey isn't over and that your path is still being written. And if you want more stories like this, stories of faith, resilience, and quiet miracles, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God bless you, guide your steps, and give you the strength to build the doors that were never given to you.